This is but the beginning of the birth pangs. Birth is hard. It's beautiful. It's messy. It takes effort. It takes companionship. It is a terrifying time and a wonderful time. These are but the beginnings of the birth pangs. Jesus says these words overlooking the temple. At this point, Jesus has been in the temple area. He has had a rather pointed conversation about the treasury and money. He has engendered hostility. He has made the powers that be angry, nervous, and afraid. And they are out to get him. They don't like his followers. They don't like what he does. They don't like the fact that he tells rich young rulers that they ought to give all of their money away, because that belies a world in which the rich are supposed to be blessed by God. They don't like that on the way to heal the daughter of a respected religious elder, he stops in the middle of the street to listen to this bleeding, homeless woman and hear her story. And he does it without shame. He does it without hesitation. They don't like it that he sees the blind man Bartimaeus, who throws off his means of living, his shelter, dropping his cloak to the ground and following Jesus. They don't like that he came back to the center of power to raise his friend Lazarus. They don't like someone who can raise people from the dead. It makes powerful people very nervous. Because part of the way that power works is it relies on people dying. It relies on people being afraid of dying. That threat of death, that threat that the Roman Empire can at any point execute you for religious sedition, for imperial sedition, for failing to pay your taxes. That threat of death is how empires thrive. It's how totalitarian regimes and fascism thrive. The fear of death, of loss. The powers that be don't like it when somebody tells a different story. What they want is their glorious buildings to remain glorious. Their churches to stand tall and to represent the power of empire and the power of a religious state. The Episcopal Church used to be called the Republican House at Prayer. And we laugh, but that's because there has been a significant shift in the politics and the commitments of the Episcopal Church. Not always Republican, not always Democrat, but different. A shift, and it has called into question our complicity with state power. The fact is, the National Cathedral is an Episcopal cathedral because we have pretensions to be a national church. And in being a national church, there have been times when we have supported the violence of our nation. The Episcopal Church did not do a good job in the Civil War, my friends. It's not true that we didn't split. There actually was a split in the Episcopal Church of Episcopalians who refused to condone slavery, but the majority of the Episcopal Church said nothing. This is the law of the land. And the law of the land was violence. And we supported it. It was not until the civil rights movement that the Episcopal Church, led by a bunch of young, rambunctious, rabble-rounding, not even clergy, but seminary students, who decided that it was indeed wrong that not everybody could vote, who rode buses of freedom in the South, some of whom who died as a result of it, that the Episcopal Church began to shift its relationship with power, with the nation in which we are rooted. Jesus sits across a valley looking at the temple, and if you know anything about how Jerusalem is built on a mountain. And when you come out of the western gates of Jerusalem, you descend a hill, walking through the graves of those who have died, because it is Jewish practice in Jerusalem that you cannot be buried inside the city walls. And so outside of Jerusalem are graves that go back thousands of years, my friend. So Jesus speaks his words in the temple, walks out of the western gate, down into the valley below, up the other side to an olive grove, where he can look upon the beautiful city. You have seen pictures of the very view that Jesus saw. Every time you see a picture of Jerusalem with the Dome of the Rock, the difference being that there is no temple in our pictures. Jesus overlooks a city with a gorgeous and beautiful temple, a temple in which he has come to loggerheads with religious leaders over how they live out their own religious practice. Because Judaism is not a uniform practice and religion. There is, just like in Christianity, factions and different interpretations and different ways of understanding what it is to live as the people of God. And Jesus speaks out of a prophetic tradition that says that we live as the people of God by being a people of justice, by being a people who level the playing field, who ensure that the poor are lifted up and the rich are brought low so everybody has enough. That is the prophetic tradition of Jesus. And Mark is writing this gospel, telling this story to a group of people that when they look out on the city of Jerusalem, they see what we see. No temple. Because at this point in time, the temple has been destroyed. The complicity between the religious elite enforcing imperial Roman power has come to an end. Jewish rebels rise up with violence and are shut down with violence. And Rome wants to make so sure that these Jewish rebels get the point that Rome razes Solomon's temple to the ground, leaving only a wall at which now we go to wail. Friends, Jesus is talking about a world that is inevitable. We think of prophecy as a prediction of the future. That is wrong. Prophecy is not a prediction of the future. Prophecy in Scripture is an explanation of the present. It is an acknowledgement of the reality of what is happening now. And most often, it is an acknowledgement that what is happening now is unjust. Jesus says nations will rise against nations, and there will be famine in the earth and birth pangs, the pain of birth. It is inevitable. It is inevitable because we have bought a lie. We have bought a lie that the only way to care for one another, or us, our people, is through violence. Through creating groups and communities that only exist over and against somebody else. And the reason Jesus is so irritating to Rome and to the religious elite, and so profoundly inspiring to so many Jewish followers, is because he preaches an alternative. He practices an alternative. He lives another way of being. In our culture, we think that the opposite of active is passive. We think that one can either act or sit passively and receive, and too often in our culture, because we believe the lie, we think that active also means violent. Because our culture thrives on violence. It is dependent on violence. Violence to nations around us, violence to those within us. Yesterday some celebrated, the martyrdom of 7 Jesuits and 2 women who took care of them. They were Jesuits who taught at UCA, the Universidad de Central America. And they were executed by a team of people trained at Fort Benning in America, the School of the Americas. And they were executed because they were a threat to the democratic capitalist plans of the United States in Central America, because they preached a gospel of liberation in which, instead of religion teaching passivity and an acceptance of a status quo and an acceptance of complicity with a state, they preached a gospel that said, oh no, God calls us to be free. God calls us to listen to the cries of those who are poor and vulnerable, because they understand why they are poor and vulnerable. And God calls us as communities to form together, to live in a different way. Jesus offers an alternative way of living as a community. And it is a threat. It is a threat to both sides of the aisle. It is a threat to all powers that believe that violence is the only way. But it is not passive. On the civil rights pilgrimage, we had the opportunity to go to a museum that is on the other side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge from the town of Selma. We walked over the Edmund Pettus Bridge as a group. For those of you who don't know, the Edmund Pettus Bridge was the bridge over which thousands of African Americans and some of their white supporters marched twice. The first time, they were driven back with horrific violence that was caught on television and shocked and horrified the nation so much that the rally gathered people from all over the country who rode buses to walk across that bridge with Martin Luther King, with Jesse Jackson, with so many women and men who had trained for years how to do that march. So many men and women called foot soldiers. And this museum was dedicated to these foot soldiers. If you walk in, there were footprints all over the walls, and every footprint had a name on it. People who never showed up in a newspaper, who never made it on television except as the kind of mass behind, perhaps, the other end of a hose or the hoofs of a horse. And a woman whose name I cannot remember now told us a story about how she, as a teenager, became involved. And she was really not all this interested in this talk of pacifism and passive and nonviolence and whatnot. She didn't really like it, but she became involved in the movement anyways. And after she told her story, I asked her, I said, so how did you go from someone who rejected nonviolence to being a foot soldier in a nonviolent movement? And she said, oh, I'm not a pacifist. I don't believe in nonviolence. And I thought, what? She says, I think, I've got a gun in my house. I need to be able to protect myself. But you know what I saw? I saw that this nonviolent practice, it worked. Nothing else had worked, she said. It worked. And so she dedicated her time and her life to learning the strategies that got people across that bridge, that taught them that when you get knocked over, you cover the back of your neck with your hands and you curl up in a ball, protecting the most vulnerable parts of you. Letting people know where to gather, ensuring that there was food and blankets at those gathering places, ensuring that everybody had a phone number to call when they were arrested, teaching people how to be arrested and how to survive in jail. The nonviolent strategy of the civil rights movement was anything but passive. It was a movement of active resistance to violence. An active and intentional effort to learn and live a new way. And it was threatening. It was threatening to the powers that be in our nation. It continues to be threatening to the powers that be in our nation. But friends, we are called to that life. We are called to be a people that recognizes the lies that we have been told about who belongs and who does not belong, about who is safe and who is unsafe. For those of you that heard Charles Carson speak today at Formation, he talked a lot about the ways in which he was formed to believe a certain set of things, but that because he was both of African descent and British, Irish, and Italian descent, Scottish, sorry. Ooh, that's my people. I got us mixed up there. British, Scottish, and Italian descent, it confused the narrative because he wasn't fully black. He wasn't fully white. He ended up being adopted into a family of a Native American woman, and suddenly he started hearing a different set of stories in a different neighborhood of Tacoma. And it caused him to have to relearn about himself and the world around him, to unlearn the lies and the stereotypes about himself and about other people. How many of us have learned things about the right neighborhoods to be in Tacoma and the wrong neighborhoods to be in Tacoma? How many of us have heard that homeless folks are dangerous? Friends, do you know that the greatest violence among homeless is to them, not by them? Friends, we are called to be a community that unlearns the lies that we have been told and lives into the truth of who God is calling us to be. I don't know what that truth looks like on a concrete level right now. I can tell you that there are some amazing things happening in this parish right now. There's some amazing conversations that are beginning. At the invitation of the diocese, we have been reaching out to work with an organization called Power of Two, an organization that does direct service to unhoused people. We're talking about the possibility of hosting them here, and that possibility is being led by the indomitable Christy. We're exploring what that might look like here. We have had conversations with people who experience what it is like to be in prison and to get out of prison, and our amazing OPOP team has persisted in a difficult relationship full of joys and disappointments with a woman who was released and who is now back in prison, but they will stay in that relationship because they have learned about the reality of what it is to come out of incarceration and how hard it is to not go back. Friends, we have a community garden that is going to be built. We got money for it, thanks to Ron. We have money from the city of Tacoma to work with Food is Free in Tacoma to build a community garden. No idea where this is going to lead. We don't know whose food, who is going to get the food of that garden. I'll tell you that I hope that there are neighbors who live in apartment buildings that would like a plot of land. I hope that we start planting herbs and edibles all around our open spaces so that people who cannot have a garden of their own can have a little bit of fresh parsley or basil or rosemary to put on their salads. And that they know that this is a space that they can come and get a little bit of food, a little bit of fresh stuff for their garden, and maybe a bag of groceries if they need it. They can have the experience of digging in the dirt, of connecting with the soil that God has created, the dirt of which we are made. Deacon Donna and Deacon Becca, who is sitting at the back, wave your hand, are going to open up a sacred ground class. Friends, sacred ground is one of the curriculums developed by the Episcopal Church, specifically in light of the Episcopal Church's complicity with slavery. All those big, fancy, wealthy churches in the north were built on the trade and slavery of cotton in the south. We have a history. If you want to be a part of that class, you reach out to Donna, you reach out to Becca, announcements will come. It's an opportunity to learn and to tell our own stories of the racism that we as white people bear in our bodies. Intentional or not, friends, if you were raised in this country and you are white, I hate to break it to you, you're a racist. And so we learn. How did we become that way? And we unlearn the stories that made us that way, and we tell the stories of our own lives, and we weep, and we repent, and we grow to become the people that Jesus is. Jesus reminds us the birth pangs are the beginning. But we are called to be the child that is born. Friends, right about this time in the liturgical season, the readings change. We are reading from the prophet Daniel. We will soon be reading from the book of Revelation. Advent, which means coming, used to start this Sunday in the Episcopal and Roman Church. Actually, in the Eastern Church, too. Advent used to start earlier, and you feel it in our readings, because suddenly we talk about prophecy and apocalypse. But apocalypse does not mean the end of the world. Apocalypse means the revealing of the world. Jesus looks over Jerusalem, and he speaks words that reveal the reality of violence on which so much of our world is built, and he calls his people to become people who live a different life And that life will put us at odds with the world around us. It will. The likelihood that anybody in this parish is going to die because of that is quite low. But it is not inevitable, my friends. We are called to be a people who live in a different way. We are called to be a community that is an icon. An icon, I'm not talking about the little thing on your computer screen. I'm talking about that kind of religious imagery that is common in the East. An icon is a making present of the divine through a person whose life has been particularly divine, through a community whose life reflects something of the many faceted glory of God. We are called to be an icon, to be a window into the child that is coming. We are called to become the embodiment of that child. Friends, the birth pangs are everywhere around us, and they have always been everywhere around us. What some of us may be feeling about our current situation is not new. And the church, the people of God, whether it is through Judaism or through Christianity, the people of God have always survived. The people of God have thrived. Not because they all lived, not because they all did it right, not because they all had beautiful buildings, but because together as a community, they practiced living a new reality. Amen.